Hello, everyone. Welcome to Random Encounter 346 or 346. My name is John Logan, and you know what? I want to talk about what I'm playing right now because I just finished the Blackwell series, Dave Gilbert's adventure game series before he created Unavowed and more recently Old Skies. But then I was like, you know what? After playing a point-and-click adventure game, I really feel like something more active. I feel like a side scroller. I feel like Mario. And I have a copy of Super Mario Wonder right over here. I got it for my birthday last year. Did I play that? Hell no. I'm going to download a ROM hack of Super Mario Brothers 3 instead. So I'm playing Mario Adventure, which is one of the most famous ROM hacks for Super Mario Brothers 3 because it added in new power-ups and just did a remarkable job of basically making an NES sequel that feels very close to Nintendo, just a little bit harder. And I'm really, really enjoying it. I probably will continue playing some Super Mario 3 ROM hacks because I just seem to be in that mindset where I want to play. I like those physics. I want to play with that. So I'm going to introduce the panel now. So joining us today is Zach.
Hello.
And joining us today is Mark.
Hiya.
Out of curiosity, Zach, this is going to sound like I'm complimenting you. It's not meant to be. You are exceptionally good at video games. It seems like Kaizo hacks and this kind of thing would be in your wheelhouse. Have you ever played any?
I have, yes.
Do you enjoy them?
I do, although it depends on the specific game because it's fan made. But
yeah, I played a fair number of ROM hacks for Super Mario Brothers 3 and Super Mario World, and I think I prefer ROM hacks for Super Mario Brothers 3. I don't know why. Obviously, better graphics and stuff with World, but there's something about Mario Brothers 3 I just love. Anyway, so yeah, ROM hacks and mods. And speaking of modding, let's talk about Bethesda. So we had a final release, I guess, providing they don't release it on Switch 2, which holy crap, this would be a train wreck. But Starfield just got released on the PlayStation 5. And alongside that, the final piece of story expansion, the Free Lanes update got released with it. And it's gotten quite a bit of conversation going online. People are talking about Starfield again. People are talking about, is this game good? Is it bad? And everyone seems to have an opinion on that. So, Zach, you reviewed the game. Before we jump into that, I'm just going to a little bit of background about Starfield. Everyone knows it pretty much. It got announced with a teaser trailer in E3 2018, I think, it was 2018. And then, of course, it just vanished for many, many years. They announced it way, way, way too early. Bethesda has let's call it a habit of doing that. And in that time, we didn't hear that much about it. But of course, people were getting really excited. People were like, all right, it's going to be Skyrim in space. And then, of course, lots happened in the meantime. Lots happened. ZeniMax was acquired by Microsoft, and then they decided, okay, we need some more polish here. It got delayed numerous times, and then finally it got released in 2023. And to say it was divisive would be putting it mildly. It's a Bethesda game, so lots of crashes, lots of bugs. People really loved the aesthetic of the game. I think it was called NASA Punk, but unfortunately, people had a significant problem with the story, some of the questing, and primarily the open galaxy, I guess, the open world, where there were 1,000 planets, but they were all procedurally generated. So they all felt very samey. And also you kind of expected to be able to fly through space all the time and, really get into that role playing as a space pirate captain. But unfortunately, that's not really what happened. It turned into kind of a fast travel fest where you had to jump between systems and planets. So this update actually theoretically fixed that. It opened it up so you can fly between planets. Basically, you set autopilot, you can go off and you can talk to your companions and do some stuff in the ship while you head there, which really does open it up quite a bit. And the PlayStation 5 obviously opens it up quite a bit for people who, don't have powerful enough PCs or an Xbox. So, Zach, divisive game. What were your thoughts?
So, first of all, even though they open it up a little bit, you don't really, like with autopilot, for example, you don't really control your ship The only difference is you can talk to companions, and it feels like the space aspect still needs some improvement, if that makes sense. So most of the time, unless you have like a certain, like a DLC quest where it's important to do that, you're still trying to just get to the planets to do the next quest, right?
Mm-hmm. Which, as I understand it, is I don't know. Okay. Full disclosure here. Both Zach and I got copies of Starfield with the new DLC. Zach got it on PlayStation 5. I got it on my PC for Steam, and I can't play it. I have experienced a persistent bug where my game will freeze in the lodge when talking to anyone in the lodge for the first time, right after the first cutscene. Specifically, I've been using Noel, and like I will get into a little bit into the conversation, and then the game will just freeze. Sound will continue in the background, but everything else will freeze. And then I get a no response in Windows, and I have to close it out because of that. So it's not crashing, so I don't get a crash report from Bethesda. And I troubleshooted the heck out of this myself, and then I contacted Bethesda customer support, and they've been slowly working through troubleshooting steps with me, starting from the most basic have you tried turning it off and on again, all the way to screwing around with some deeper settings in Windows, and there's no luck. I cannot for the life of me figure out what is wrong with this game, why it continuously is crashing on me, because it is just Starfield. It is only Starfield. I play many, many, many games on my PC, many games that are very graphically intensive. Look, the point is that I'm very frustrated by this. And as I understand it, I'm not alone, because people on PlayStation 5 are also having a time, aren't they?
Yes, very much so. I think it's a problem introduced in the new update because every single platform has been experiencing crashes. And on PlayStation 5, there's actually a full console crash. I'm lucky enough to not see that, but I've seen that it's an issue, and that could potentially brick your system if that happens. So
yeah, which is kind of shocking when you think about it, although kind of not, because I don't like beating up Bethesda for their reputations for bugs and crashes and things like that, because at this point it's become a meme. It's been the longest standing joke about Bethesda. Every Bethesda game is a disaster, especially at launch. But like, come on, guys, it's a meme. Like, don't release something that breaks people's systems. It's not hard. It's very hard, but it's not hard to don't release a broken game. That's not hard. So we've talked about this. We're getting it out of the way. We want to talk about the game itself, but just so you know, I have only been able to play for 3 hours and then 5 minutes continuously for upwards of an hour and a half trying to troubleshoot this thing. And Zach, you managed to get through the whole game, but with crashes and going back to previous saves and losing some progress and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I try to be more lenient, in terms of like, I don't want to kind of beat a dead horse, right? But every single time I loaded into a new area, I was thinking, am I going to crash? And that's not a good first feeling every time something new happens. So,
well, considering it's Bethesda, you'd be beating a flying horse, but that's beside the point.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, so let's just talk about the game then. Like I said, obviously this has gotten significant difference of opinion, obviously online. Noah was a reviewer a few years ago. Noah absolutely loved it. Noah delivered a great review, and they didn't really care for the first piece of DLC very much because of some of the subject matter. But I really think that getting this game out to a wider audience could have given Bethesda an opportunity to, I guess, redeem themselves. And it doesn't seem like they've done so. Like, basically, the response to the PS5 version has been exactly the response to the PlayStation and Xbox version, which is some people really like it. Some people are just, it's mid. And some people just flat out hate it. You like it. You just have a lot of problems with some of the systems and certainly, obviously, the bugs.
Yeah, I think so. Going back to the 1,000 planets that are just procedurally generated, most of them are basically the same.
Yeah.
I think Bethesda could make a much better game by just having one great planet.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's that's when their games are the best, right? Or even just one region. And I think
absolutely.
if they focus more on just the handcrafted content, it could be a much better game. Obviously, it would not be Starfield, but I think, I think that's where the potential is, if that makes sense.
Yeah, or alternatively, go the Outer Worlds route, except like make it bigger. Like the Outer Worlds always takes place in a single system where there's, several planets or stations or things like that. And with Outer Worlds and Outer Worlds 2, they are smaller open world walled gardens. But like Bethesda could have gone full on open world. They could have just created like a couple of slightly smaller ones, and you still would have gotten the like world hopping feel of it.
Yeah, I think, I guess to be fair to Bethesda, it is extremely hard to make a good space game just because of how many planets there are, right? Like space is massive. It's huge. I think potentially another solution is just work on the procedural generation a little bit more, because all the planets just feel almost the same. There's like 6 different outposts maybe, and you see the same kind of outposts over and over. So you're kind of stuck to just, I think in a review I said, sticking within the boundaries, right? Like within the handcrafted areas, which are better, but that makes the world fragmented. It doesn't feel like you're exploring.
Yeah, and part of the joy, for me anyway, of a Bethesda game, because I actually think Bethesda does this better than honestly just about anyone, is you're dropped in a world, you see a thing over there, you go over to that thing, and you get like a little ding and like a little hit of happiness when it says you found this new place. Like that's what really makes me enjoy a Bethesda game. It's finding a new place that offers unique experiences, maybe even like a little story. It doesn't need to be a big one. That's the beauty of their open worlds for me. And it seems with procedural generation, they're taking that joy away by just replacing it with generic, basically the encounter equivalent of a fetch quest.
Procedural generation to me, like especially the way they implemented it, has as much soul as AI, sadly.
Yeah, there's a lot of parallels there. It just seems very weird to me that like they looked at Mass Effect 1 and exactly the system there and is like, we're going to do that and we're probably not going to improve on it very much.
Yeah, it was
a
problem.
Weird. It was a weird choice that I understand. I wish I could say that I knew what you were talking about because I haven't gotten to that point yet. I just had gotten some space combat. But even like looking around the initial tutorial planet that I was on, after it starts in a mine and you see this mysterious space MacGuffin and you touch it and then you have to go off and then you land on a planet. You need to take care of some pirates. Logically, you'd head straight to the facility where the pirates are. But me being me, and it's a Bethesda game, I was like, I'm going to explore. So I started looking around and yeah, there's lots of resources everywhere. And there were points of interest on the map. But when I got to those points of interest, there was really nothing of interest there. It was just like maybe there was like one other facility. There were some like other resources, things like that. It just was, and I've heard this criticism thrown at this game before. It was just boring.
Yeah, I think so. There was one faction quest, the Region Industries, which I thought was interesting, like the most interesting faction quest. But the problem there is, I noticed that every single quest, it puts you right in the middle of a city, basically within the handcrafted areas, and doesn't let you go like out exploring. And I think that's very intentional so that they have a crafted experience, but it doesn't feel like a Bethesda game. It just feels like a extremely linear chain of quests.
And by offering the procedurally generated planets, it's almost creating the illusion of a Bethesda game, where you get to explore all these different places, and in reality, you get to explore one place remixed many times.
Yeah, and it's interesting because even in most of the main story or in the other faction quests, they don't want you going into the other planets. Like there was no point where the game said, "Oh, you could explore, all these random planets." Like they exist, but it's it just feels like it's not something they're proud of.
No, I think I think that you might be right about that, unfortunately. And I can't speak. I got the feel of the game. I got through the whole tutorial, although I got a crash there too. And now I'm stuck. So I didn't get to experience some of the deeper gameplay systems. I just got to experience some of the more frustrating ones that were really poorly explained in game, like going out lung damage, for example, or how O2 oxygen is used as almost a resource for your stamina and things like that. I found that these things were very, very poorly explained, and frankly speaking, I was weirded out by it. I was like, I don't remember things being quite this. I don't, like, for example, I got some lung damage. I didn't know how to heal it. It wouldn't give me any information on how to heal it. Presumably, the item to heal the damage wasn't on the planet I was on. It felt very weird and not really all that fun to be in that situation.
Yeah, another example is if you take fall damage, you have a chance that your legs will be damaged, and that's not enjoyable. Like, even if you take 1 point of fall damage, I think there's still a chance that happens. And it's not like Outer Worlds where you can just say like, oh, I don't want this flaw, right? I don't want leg damage. That's probably a pretty bad flaw. So, and that affects your sprint. So then now you can't like access things as like areas as quickly, like in the cities for a while. So, and then you have to go find an item to fix that.
The one thing that I was actually, there are a lot of things I was sad that I didn't get to experience in Starfield, but the thing I was actually really looking forward to was the shipbuilding system, because it looks really, really fun, really interesting. Like, so many choices to build and customize your own ship, and I just didn't get a chance to play it.
That was probably the best aspect of the game, in my opinion, because you can make ships that should not work. Like, it just from a physics perspective, right? Like, it should not be like a viable way to get to places, but they let you do that, which I found was interesting.
In the future, they've figured it out. They've found ways. I mean, basically any science fiction is just a way around physics, but that's really funny to me. It looked really, really cool. And I guess that the outpost system was interesting too, although I have to admit that the outpost system to me on the surface looked like an extension of the settlement system from Fallout 4. And the settlement system from Fallout 4 generally was considered to be one of the worst parts of the game.
So I noticed this, and I didn't mention it in the review because that's I think a little bit too technical, but you could go to a very, very high level planet, and this was one of the only advantages of procedural generation, although I don't think it's necessarily a great thing, but you can go to a planet with a lot of herbivores, right, that are just extremely high level, like 75, for example, and you just place an outpost and just kill the herbivores, and you'll get way more experience than you can ever get from questing.
That's interesting.
And they don't attack back, so it doesn't matter what level they are.
That's a little depressing when you really think about it. Another thing that I found that I didn't love, and maybe it would grow on me, but based on your review, I don't think so, is I thought that the menu system wasn't that hot. Really not really all that well laid out, especially the inventory system and the way you equip weapons. I thought it was very clunky with a lot of extra steps that really didn't need to be there.
Yeah, I think that's probably due to just when we make a AAA game, I think they probably thought maybe we should have this, maybe we should have that, right? And then that makes the menus bloated because there are just so many different features. I don't think all of them are necessary. For example, I think, as you said, basically their equivalent of the flaw system, except you can cure it, but you can't. You can't choose. I think that's like a problem that doesn't need to be there, and then it bloats the menus because you have so many like different effects going on, and that's causing the problem.
And there are so many menus in this game, which I imagine are even worse when you're on the PlayStation 5 and you're not using a mouse.
Yeah, definitely. Like whenever I want to continue a quest, right, I just think, okay, well, like I'll open up the menu, go to the quest and then like do everything to get to the next area. And I'm not actually exploring anything during that time. So
one of the problems about talking about Starfield is it is very easy to kind of fall into the trap of being super, super negative about it, because that tended to be the discourse about the game and has been the discourse since. And the reality, as I understand it, based on your review and my own experience playing the first few hours, I was not thinking this is a terrible game, I don't want to play this. It did not push me away. I'm actually disappointed that I'm not getting to play more. Because I thought, okay, it looks like there is a good game here with some rough edges. It looks like about a 70, 75.
That's where I would arrive at. My score is lower because I just cannot ignore the crashes in this sense. I cannot. I have, like, that's a reality, right? But I don't think it's a bad game. I don't think it's the best game. I think it's somewhere in between. It depends on what you want out of a game.
It's not in the same stratosphere, funny enough, because it's space, as like, well, Skyrim, for example. Like, Skyrim has its detractors, but it's generally considered to be one of the greatest games of all time. People adore Skyrim for very, very good reasons. This game, I don't think, is ever going to get there.
I wanted to say, like, if you wanted to play like a Bethesda game, just go play Skyrim. But Skyrim released so many years ago that I didn't want to recommend a game that's...
Zach, I'll tell you, I've tried playing Skyrim 4 times, and every single time I have bounced off it hard, and I don't know why. Because it is a Bethesda game. It offers everything that I want out of a Bethesda game, the sense of discovery, the open world, all of that jazz. And for some reason, it doesn't click with me. And I can never figure out why. I've tried modding the crap out of it. I tried playing it vanilla. It just doesn't seem to go. That being said, I'm so disappointed with Starfield that I might just give it another shot and really push through and hopefully find something that I connect to. Because Skyrim, it's a classic for a reason.
I think with Bethesda games, there's a momentum to the experience. So if you don't get to that point where you think, oh, I want to do this next thing, then it takes time to get there, in my opinion. So until you reach that, like there's a high chance you'll bounce off, and there's nothing wrong with that either.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about some stuff that's actually good about the game, like absolutely good. One of them has a gorgeous soundtrack. Kind of gets lost in the mix, I think, but like it's still a gorgeous soundtrack.
Yeah, I think the composer is extremely talented. I think it's the only issue I had with the soundtrack is that because of all the procedural generation and everything, right? Like you get to hear like some of basically the same tracks, but you don't hear like a lot of new tracks a lot of the time, if that makes sense. So I think the whole like balancing out the soundtrack within the game is an issue, but that has nothing to do with the soundtrack itself.
Another thing I really like about the game is the design. I think it looks good. It looks clean. Some might almost say boring, but I don't feel that way about it. It is very, the phrase NASA punk, but it is very, it's a pretty clean version of the future. Even in places, I haven't reached there, but I've looked online, even on some of the other settlements and planets that are a little bit more, shall we say, rustic. It doesn't quite meet the levels of, Outer Worlds, or the inspiration for the Outer Worlds, Firefly. Like it's a very clean future, and I actually kind of like that.
Yeah, I think graphically, I played on PS5 Pro on enhanced mode, and the game looked great for an open world game. Like it obviously won't be like the same as just a single player, or not single player, like a non-open world game where everything is just every single scene is handcrafted. Like it's it's an open world game, but I think it looks great given that context.
One of the things I mentioned it earlier, and I know that you haven't delved into this yet, the reason why Bethesda games have lasted this long, and why Skyrim, Fallout 3, New Vegas 4 are still so popular, part of the reason is because of mods. To say these things have an incredible modding scene would be an understatement. Frankly speaking, like every 2 years or so, I reinstall New Vegas just to install every quest mod that has been made in the last 2 years. And generally speaking, I'll get at least 45 to 60 hours of additional content out of it that actually meets the level of the original game in terms of what it offers. I'm a little worried about Starfield in this sense because its reputation isn't that hot, and because Bethesda didn't give them modding tools out of the gate. That's only been recently, and because they keep trying to monetize the damn stuff. It seems like this game's the post-launch life of this game is going to be severely limited as compared to some of the other ones.
Yeah, so the reason I didn't talk about mods in the review is because, so I think I tried a few mods and it just crashed immediately. And one of the recommendations to avoid crashes, of the recommendations is to just delete all your mods. So I did that just to have a somewhat more stable experience, because I needed it to get through the game in the first place. So
what I think is funny about that is I totally think that is a legitimate troubleshooting step if the mods were installed off like Nexus. But if they're selling the mods at their own storefront, you expect them to be stable.
Yeah, I played most of the game without any mods for that reason. I didn't want to, like I said, beat a flying horse there, so I didn't mention that at all.
I just was going through some of the mods here, and I noticed that one of them is called the Unofficial Starfield Patch, a comprehensive bug fixing mod for Starfield that was last updated on April 8th. I'm tempted to install this and see what happens, to see if it actually fixes whatever problem I've been having. I'm going to save this so I can do just that, because God bless modders. They are the ones who make the games playable. Ignoring the unofficial Starfield patch, which normally would be on Nexus and for any other game, there are a few mods here that I really, genuinely really wanted to play, and I was incredibly disappointed that I didn't get a chance. One of them being, I don't like, there's the Trackers Alliance, the Complete Bounty Hunter series. I think this is inspired by a New Vegas mod that put in an entire bounty hunter quest line. But the one that really catches me is Kingrath Creations. Kingrath was the gentleman who created Sim Settlements and Sim Settlements 2, which arguably took the worst part of Fallout 4, the settlement system, and the worst faction in Fallout 4, the Gunners, and genuinely made both into some of the most compelling content in the game. Like, the person is incredible. They created a creation called Watchtower Orbital Strike Fleet Command, where you build up a fleet, call down orbital strikes, and take on the forces of Watchtower in an epic quest line. And I'm like, given the quality of everything in Sim Settlements 2, this is a quest this is a mod I'd really like to play. I can't, but it seems like something I'd really like.
Yeah, I think in terms of mods, I would be interested in mods that enhance the procedural generation aspect instead of just having 6 different kinds of outposts, right? If you had even twice that many, or like dozens of outposts, you might have a better experience that way. Because I think No Man's Sky also had procedural generation, and it had problems at launch, but it's a much better game now because they kept improving that aspect.
Yeah. And also, with modders being what they are, there's no reason why some of those procedurally generated worlds couldn't be replaced with handcrafted content from modders. And literally, they can go in and replace the procedural generation with deliberate locations, settlements, characters, NPCs, that kind of thing, and really enhance that section of the game. I'm not saying they'd be able to get to 1,000, but you never know.
Yeah, there's a lot they could do with it. I think even just one good planet per solar system would make a huge difference.
Yeah. We're going to move on now to the next game in a minute, but I just wanted to call attention to your bottom line in the review, which I think is just, I read it, I was like, oh, that's so good. Bottom line, all the space in the world and nowhere worth going. Oof, that's a good summation of this game.
Yeah, there's nothing interesting to explore. Like, the main aspect of the game is just, you do the quests, and the quests are fine, but you're not really exploring when you do them. You're just opening the menu and just fast traveling to wherever you need to go. And because almost the entire game is procedurally generated, you just can't Like there's just nothing interesting to do.
Yeah, there's all the space in the world and nowhere worth going. I think you summed it up beautifully there. And it's such a shame because even the worst, like Fallout 76, which has improved, but like I passionately hated when it first got released, the open world was magic. It was gorgeous. It was beautiful. It was detailed. It was compelling. It's like their open worlds can be truly magic. And it's genuinely puzzling to me that they made the choice in a game where the whole point was to explore space. They decided to back away from that.
Yeah, I will say, I guess on a more positive note, I have high hopes for Elder Scrolls 6 because they can still have good handcrafted areas and quests. So
yes, I hope I'm hoping that Elder Scrolls 6 course corrects. Yeah, Elder Scrolls 6, the thing is that it was announced, it was formally announced at the same time as Starfield. What are they doing?
Yeah, I hope we'll still be alive when it releases.
Yeah, I mean, it's very true that we're just like, yeah, okay. I'm looking at this. 1 year ago, a Reddit post, the Elder Scrolls 6 announcement is now as old as Skyrim. Oof, that is harsh. Anyway, well, Zach, thank you very much for playing through this and for roughing it and for apparently taking the life of your PS5 in your hands in hopes that it wasn't going to completely destroy your system. Wow, that's embarrassing for them.
Yeah, I had to back up my save file every single session just in case the save file corrupts.
Super smart.
I think I had like dozens of files by the end of my playthrough. So
super smart. Well, we're going to be jumping from this game actually has I don't even want to call it common DNA. Okay, Starfield. Starfield was made by Bethesda, who made Fallout 3, and they farmed out Fallout New Vegas to Obsidian Entertainment, and Obsidian Entertainment made another game, and that's what we're going to be talking about right now. And that game is Pillars of Eternity. And you might be thinking, wait a second, that's an old game. It is. It's a good game, but it's an old game. And the reason why we're talking about it is because Obsidian did something kind of cool a few months ago. It's been in early access, and finally the final version got released. So we thought it's a perfect time for a brand new review of Pillars of Eternity. And this is turn-based mode. So, Mark, you are here to talk about this. Let me cast you back to around, 2012 or so. And this was when the CRPG genre, which is, one of your favorite genres, was dead. It was completely dead, pretty much in line with one of my favorite genres, point and click adventure games. It was just, at that point in time, 3D open worlds, the Fallout, Skyrim, all of that was that was a popular thing. But we discovered that it isn't actually dead. It was just hibernating. So, in 2014, Larian Studios came out with a brand new spiritual successor to many classic CRPGs like Baldur's Gate, Icewind Dale, and that was, of course, Divinity Original Sin. And then just a year later, Obsidian Entertainment, which was a company that became the home of many classic CRPG developers after the closing of Interplay, they came out with their own spiritual successor to these games with Pillars of Eternity. Now, I'm just curious, before we get into it, as this was one of your favorite genre of games, I imagine like 2014, 2015 was like a magical time where it's like, oh my God, these two all-time bangers are coming out of my favorite genre of game.
Yeah, absolutely. I can remember when it was first sort of mooted and we started to see the early screens and the connections to the original sort of Baldur's Gate Black Isle series. And they really did go full on with the homage, everything from, the kind of blacked out map, the way the UI was put together, even the little cursor used with the quadrant sections to indicate where the party's going to go. And everything just absolutely sung, the homage to the past and the CRPG they wanted to develop. So it was super exciting, and actually probably more so for it being a new world as well. We knew they were going to step away from the Wizards of the Coast stuff because they had to. So there was a little bit of how's that going to work, but it was super exciting just because of the world and the lore, and that proved to be one of its strengths and still is one of its strengths with all of the stuff that they've done since, including Avowed, which I know we looked at not so long ago.
Unless I missed my guess, it was Pillars of Eternity and the World was their first fully owned original fantasy setting. Everything they did before that was licensed. For example, they did. They did, obviously, they did, let me try that again, was licensed. They did KOTOR 2. They did Neverwinter Nights 2. They did, obviously, Fallout New Vegas. But this was theirs. And in many ways, this saved the company because they were under severe financial strain at the time, to the point where I think they took on Stick of Truth just because they needed to in order to keep the doors open. And they opened up a Kickstarter for this under Project Eternity. And it was a massive success. It raised $4 million thereabouts. So anyway, the bottom line is that Pillars of Eternity is an incredibly important game, not just because of its contribution to the CRPG genre, but because of, the groundbreaking crowdfunding experiment. And also, it's just a remarkable, remarkable game. And now, as I said, Obsidian is... it's funny that I'm using the word revitalize to revitalize this game, when in reality, they're kind of... it's a good throwback, but it is a throwback to what was the original combat mechanics in this game. Because originally it was real time with pause, which they were very familiar with KOTOR and things, where fighting would be going on. You'd pause the game. You'd give your characters their marching orders. You'd unpause. You'd see what happens. So you mentioned it a little bit, but what was your experience with Pillars of Eternity when it first came out in regards to the combat system, for example?
I think the combat system was, it always reminded you back from, like you say, the real time with pause, right from way back, in the turn of the millennium with the original Baldur's Gate. But it was very much around that, setting up your party buffs, kiting around the map, knowing where the swarms are going to be, knowing how you can pull certain characters, certain bosses, certain creatures, and positioning your characters in doorway, positioning them around the rocks, knowing where the activation areas are going to be for where you first pick up that goblin archer or kobold archer, is going to pick you off otherwise. So it was a great game. I really enjoyed it. But for me, the combat was always a little bit diluted by the artificiality of having to work out, right, how can I just position so that I activate things on my terms, or actually it's not going well, I'll just run the party around the map, get into a room where I can bottleneck everybody. And there's certainly a place for that kind of tactics, and it's quite fun, but I always kind of thought it's not quite that true, role playing, if you like, that you would have if you were tabletop role playing, for example. So although I enjoyed it, I always kind of felt, and it probably harkens back to my own general, pleasure of turn-based stuff, never quite felt like it was quite realistic, or you were really kind of following what would be happening. So although enjoyable, it was always kind of tinged by a sense of, actually, the artificiality of the system is what's helping me to win this battle, or, manage this particular swarm. So yeah.
Turn-based in CRPGs it almost bridged the gap between the turn-based combat in JRPGs and the kind of combat that we see in strategy RPGs, in which it's all about positioning and counter move, and really trying to figure out. It's a bit more like a puzzle than a combat in a JRPG. And I can see what you mean, where while real time with pause might be a little bit more cinematic in terms of its activity and everything's happening at once, this is much more deliberate and, like you said, much more tabletop, which is what this game was inspired by. In terms of the game itself, why don't you give us a very brief overview of the plot? We don't need a big one because there's a lot of plot to get around. This game starts in a place and then ends in quite a few different places.
Yes, so I mean, it's really the kind of mysterious sort of stranger with a hidden legacy that harkens again back to Blackhouse original. But basically, you're a foreigner. You arrive in the Deerwood, a kind of a frontier location where the game starts. And when you arrive there as part of a caravan, you quickly kind of witness a strange ritual being performed by a series of strangely robed cultists, and from that moment you sort of find out there's a character that you become a watcher, who's a character who's able to read souls and kind of understand the past lives and experiences of others, and from that really it's a case of you discovering more about your legacy with the companions you meet, but also tracking down the actions and the intent of one of the figures who you first see in the first ritual, Theos, who ends up being main, if you like, the main protagonist, the villain of the piece, really, who you quickly sort of work out has got a layered plot stretching over hundreds, maybe thousands, millennia of years, as you work out how he's got his own ability to, if you like, move through time by, being reborn into different souls. Like you say, it's a really heavy plot, fantastically done. I don't think there was anything really like it before, really, or even since, in terms of the depth of metaphysics at play. And that's really it. You then spend time working around the relatively localized map. It's not, you're not going all over the world. It's really built around Defiance Bay, this large sort of colonial city and the immediate lands around. But you spend time there trying to discover what he's up to, interfacing with the local indigenous people, who live in the land. So there's lots of themes that the plot picks up, both around the metaphysics, the nature of souls, the nature of destiny, but also the nature of how, colonialism takes place as well, which is interesting because obviously, Obsidian have kept that as a key focus for all of their games actually as well. It's just come to me.
Yeah. Which is in no way relevant to today. I think one of the coolest things about this game. Now, first off, this is a sentence that is actually going to physically hurt me, which is this is an 11-year-old game. Good God.
Yeah.
I think one of the smartest things that Obsidian did was, instead of going full polygonal like they would have, like everyone was trying to do in like the late 2000s, very early 2010s, is they went back to things like hand-drawn environments. And before we get into the combat system, which is the primary thing we're talking about today, I just wanted to ask, this game really holds up, doesn't it, in terms of its graphics, presentation, certainly story and acting?
Yeah, 100%. There's still a real place for it. The hand-drawn graphics, just the way they're animated, the amount of detail they can bring to each of the locations, both, like I say, colonial cities, the different, sectors in the city, the woodlands, the moorlands, that just absolutely lives and breathes the feel of it. And that's beautifully presented. And they've kept on patching that, it's smoothly done. The framework works really well. It's smoothly zooming in and out. So as over the last 11 years, that's been patched to really make sure it's the best possible experience. But as you say, in terms of the actual dialogue as well, not all fully voiced. It still reminded me it is 11-year-old game. You still get times where half of conversation is voiced and the next bit isn't and the next bit is. So it was still the early days of that full voiceover that we kind of almost used to now. But what is there is really, really well done. And the writing, as you've said, John, is absolutely spot on. It's probably, some of the strongest, most novelesque type writing that you will see. And it requires a real investment. That is the one thing about Pillars of Eternity. I can remember when it came out, and again, harkening back to the earlier legacies of CRPGs, it does take commitment to read it. Several times you'll get conversations where you're like, right, I've got to read that again, or I need to go back through the conversation log and check and see what was said before that. Hugely deep amount of reading, hugely deep amount of lore, but it all stands up really, really well. And thematically, just fantastic stuff. So yeah, really, really good.
That's really great to hear. And yeah, voice acting was a little bit more, I guess, well, in terms of budget, hiring actors, that kind of thing, it can be pretty expensive. So you understand why, especially back in these days for this game, which was a big gamble for them. My God, this game must have been, I know they got $4 million from Kickstarter, but like, what a gamble. Like, especially from a company that this was their legacy. This is where almost all of their major people started out. But it was considered to be a dead genre. I imagine the success of Divinity Original Sin probably was oh, thank God, the previous year for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose what's interesting, and I know that it came out after the fact, but I know Josh Sawyer, who was one of the main leads behind, the studio and the games, I know he's gone on record to say that he felt that actually, a lot of his the Pillars of Eternity games were perhaps his most compromised works because of how the crowdfunding backing worked in terms of, we've got to do this because actually that was a crowdfunding target and therefore we need to deliver it. But equally, it wouldn't have maybe got delivered without crowdfunding background. So it was interesting to hear him talk, and it just made me think about, obviously, coming up to talking about the turn-based combat, whether that was ever, on the board somewhere in the very early developmental meetings or, not. So, yeah.
maybe that was a compromise with, I mean, I know it was their show and everything, but realistically speaking, at the time, turn-based combat was considered to be by many devs, publishers, incredibly dated. It needs to be real-time combat.
Yeah. And what's really interesting, Johnny, is I know when Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire came out, it wasn't as successful. It was the game, if you like, that kind of put the stoppers a little bit on the momentum, just because of, I don't think it was marketed particularly well, because I think it is a great game. But I know that was sort of turn-based. They had put in a turn-based system there. But I remember at the time when that was out, there was a bit of a clamour for, well, actually, are you going to be able to apply the turn-based system to the early game, to Pillars of Eternity? And I can remember at the time there was almost a bit of negativity around, well, no, because it won't work. So the fact that this was kind of announced not long ago and it's gone through, the community support is really, really interesting. But it's also quite a big about turn in a way as well. I was surprised that they did get around to doing this, given all the noises that they made. When Deadfire came out, it seemed to be almost more of a definite no than a yes, we might do that sometime. But maybe that's because of the success of some of the wider turn-based genres that we're seeing just across the strand, aren't we? I'm thinking about Clair Obscur, obviously Baldur's Gate 3 itself, Metaphor, huge games that actually all have their roots in the turn-based approach.
To me, this screams passion project. This is like something that, well, I haven't read too much about it, but I imagine that this was not a priority for Obsidian Entertainment. I imagine this was like some people not doing it in their spare time, but kind of doing it in their spare time because this is something they wanted to do. And thankfully they did. I think it revitalizes the game quite a bit in terms of people are talking about Pillars of Eternity again, an 11-year-old game. And it's not even getting like a re-release or remaster. It's just a new gameplay mode.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think because they were very clear from the offer by involving the community, it's been, if you like, kind of really gone all the way through alpha, really, with community involvement, looking at how different abilities trigger, wanting to get a feel for, well, would this or would this not work? So the fact they've done it that way, I think, lends itself more to that is the case, a group of developers, let's try this, let's bring the community on. It's their passion, it's come through their desire. So hopefully it'll get some momentum, because I fully agree with you. I do think it changes the nature of the game significantly. And I think for those folk who were maybe unsure about the real time of pause, or like you say, the cinematic nature and the chaos that sometimes feel like it brings, I think it offers a really effective alternative.
Yeah. In the original, as we mentioned, it was real time with pause. And as I said, it's literally like, it's real time, and you pause the game, you give your marching orders, you unpause the game, you see what happens. It's fascinating to me that they were able to translate that real time action and the speed of that kind of combat into a fluid turn-based combat system. And I think, reading your review, I think that one of the ways they were able to do it is, rather than just go turn, with giving everyone a fixed action per round, it relies on weapon and character speeds and like what they're wearing, if they're wearing heavy armor, a lighter build, which is a really clever way of, I guess, creating a realistic turn in the actual combat.
Yeah, and what's interesting is, because when it was first announced, I kind of thought, well, they'll just probably apply and bolt on what they produced for Deadfire. So Deadfire does have a turn-based system, but it is more, you have one action per turn and then the next round begins. So, the devs actually said that what they want to do for this one is to open it up more and actually look at weapon speed, for example. So you've got some characters where they might be armed with a dagger. It's a very quick weapon. And as you might remember, every weapon has like a speed listed with it. They're still there. So you've got your speed, if you like, listed for different abilities of different weapons. But what that means is, actually, rather than just having more action points, or, you can do more things, actually, you just have more opportunities to act within a given round. So that opens up the tactics loads, because actually, you might have a character who's not hitting very hard, but you can engage multiple foes, or you can get around the battlefield more quickly. So actually, it's quite nuanced change. And credit to them, because I thought they'd just bolt on the previous system, but they've obviously given it more thought. They've looked at the bones of that real-time system, of the speed system. They've really unpicked it, and on the whole, it works really, really well. I certainly found that, with little, the Druid's little animal companion, the working the little fox, really, really quick acting, can get around the battlefield and harry lots of different enemies very, very quickly. Whilst I've got some of my other big musket wielding, sort of fighters just peppering people from afar, but knowing that I've probably only got one shot to be able to do that on any given round, it does work well.
Yeah, I imagine that you can use those characters to create, I believe you say, create space and control the battlefield. Whereas, like with rifles, which feel more deliberate and weighty because they take a while to you fire, you have to reload, that kind of thing. I imagine it creates an interesting, dynamic, I guess, battlefield.
Yeah, absolutely. And the biggest change, Jono, is, and I think we talked about it a bit earlier, my biggest frustration with the original were those sort of area control spells. I'm thinking about the Pillars of Faith spell, the kind of the seal spells where I can lay a trap on the floor and, if the enemies get over it, it'll explode. Because the frustration on the original was things are always moving. You cast the spell, you're never quite sure whether it's going to activate, in real time just before the guys, are going to come over it. So I used to stay quite a lot away from perhaps some of the priest spells, the cipher spell, just because you were never quite sure whether actually they were going to work as intended or you'd miss the opportunity. Now, that absolutely opens the door, because you can see the area of effect, you can see from the turn order when they're going to trigger. So tactically, it's just much more insightful, and it's so kind of fulfilling when you've set up a series of interlaced abilities and everything can trigger, and you see the tactics paying off. Yeah, and that's the biggest thing for me. And it's not that you couldn't do it on the original. It's just on the original, it was often sometimes a lot more trial and error. And to be fair, the way that cooldowns worked in the original did allow for that. I personally found it a lot more satisfying to be able to set and read the abilities as well. I did a lot more debuffing this time round, because I thought, actually, I know it's going to hit. I know I can target you. I know I've got time to target you. So I am going to try and reduce your fortitude, or I am going to try and frighten a character, because actually, I've got the time and I can put that strategy in. So I thought it opened up the tactics of the game massively. And I think that side of it is one where, like I've said, for those folk who maybe prefer to have a little bit more order to how they see things, I think it's definitely worth a revisit now.
And I think that it has been extremely well received by both fans of classic CRPGs and just in general. It seems to be a really, really well done system. That being said, and you mentioned this in your review, it is not a perfect system, because they are layering a new system on top of an old system, which can create some bugs, that kind of thing, even though it's been in beta for a few months now. Did you experience anything like that?
Yeah, just a couple of combat log kind of glitches, and then probably one that, and I think it would be different for everybody, occasional things where you would activate a combat and then someone on the other side of the map we've not discovered yet, might be activated. And then on a couple of occasions, just where the combat itself kind of hung, no one could resolve the turn and the UI wasn't interactable. But it goes back to what you've said, John. There are so many possible combats with so many possible makeup of, class and companion combinations. I think it would be, in this case, I would expect and perhaps, appreciate the fact that they're going to need to be ironed out, or there might be a certain combination of factors that might lead to some pain. I suppose the best thing is it is, a game where you can save at any time. Most combats, aren't too long just because of the nature of them. And actually, the other thing about it is it's all toggleable as well. So, if there are any of those, quick combats where I need just to run from one side of the map to the other just to get a quest completed, and I bump into a series of wolves or a series of middling spiders, I can just toggle back to your time of pause, stomp them and get on. So you could also play it in a way where actually the turn base is used for those high intensity kind of boss encounters, the set piece encounters. So no, there were a couple of bugs, but certainly nothing that I thought hindered my overall positive experience.
Yeah, I'm curious. We're going to move on to the next game in a second that you wanted to talk about, but you played Pillars of Eternity before, and what did it feel like to play it again with this new system in place? Did it almost feel like playing it again for the first time, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we're of the same opinion. It had such a big impact on me when it first launched that, the story beats, the places, even lines, really resonated with, I could vividly remember all of the first meetings of the companions because of how well written they are and how original they are. But it definitely did feel different when it came to the combat. I think the best example I can think of is relatively early in the game, you have the opportunity to fight kind of a duke in his kind of keep. I can remember that, in the original game, it's quite a tricky fight because he's on his throne, he's got all of his best men around him. You can try and kite him by sending one person in and running out, and kind of, cheese it a bit like that. But this time round, knowing that it was turn-based and thinking, right, this is a tricky fight, but actually I can really think about how this is going to work. I'm going to do that for there, going to try and control that. Really did open it up. And particularly, some of the characters like the grieving mother character who were never really spent a lot of time within the original, seeing how her combat abilities now work turn-based really opened her character up, and that did feel like playing a new character for the first time because, the turn-based approach allowed me to study it in a way that I didn't really give that much of a look in the original. So again, I think, for those people like us who know it really well, we've played it a lot, we've got a lot of time for it, definitely think it's worth a look. And that's not even without considering the expansions as well, which obviously add just as much more. It's a huge game.
I think one of the cooler things about this, and I haven't even heard rumors about this, but it seems to me that now they have I don't want to use it perfected, but they have refined the turn-based mode for Pillars of Eternity. There isn't really a reason why they wouldn't be able to take this turn-based mode and export it to Tyranny, for example, which uses the exact same engine and gameplay model, or even Deadfire, and completely revitalize the somewhat underwhelming turn-based combat there.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, Jono, I'd not even thought of that. Tyranny turn-based. Oh my lord, I need to get on their Facebook or get on their social media and start banging the drum. That is such a good catch. That is such an underrated RPG. And I would 100% enjoy that more if that was turn-based for exactly the same reasons that we've just outlined. I need to do that now. Note to self. Let's bang that drum. Let's bang that drum.
Hopefully they do, because I think this is a really, obviously it is work. I'm not saying it's not work, and it takes devs and it takes time and it takes publicity and marketing and everything, but it is an interesting way to get some additional mileage out of some games that have been in your back catalog for years. And get people talking about them again, especially if they are planning on doing anything like another CRPG in the future.
100%. And the other thing as well, and I touch on this a little bit in my review, is playing it again did remind me as well, actually, this is, because it's 10 plus years ago, it's very much focused on that, you are a bit of the chosen one, you are a watcher, it's about you, it's about your journey as the main character, and it's very much quite focused on that and the kind of the main plot. There's not as many of those, and this happens a lot in Deadfire, it happens a huge amount in Avowed. It doesn't have that factional RPG element, and I don't know what your view is. I know that, it's a bit of a trope, isn't it, amongst the last sort of 5, 6, 7 years where, these big RPGs, you would have a main story, but it would be delivered through whichever faction you almost want to go through or you want to see through the eyes of, whereas with Pillars, that's not really there. There's a little bit of it, but it's really laser focused on your journey and on your, if you like, self and on your personal development. The factions just really are satellite to it. And again, it was reminding me playing it through just how much it was focused on that core kind of tabletop experience. It's about a group of companions finding a mystery and trying to solve it. It's not really about, well, which faction do we need to choose, or do we need to gain favor from, or do we need to work through? And I thought that was just something else that struck me just playing it again, in light of all the recent kind of Western RPGs where factionalization really has, I think, been a bit of a market demand, hasn't it? A bit of a trope at the moment.
Well, frankly speaking, I'm delighted you enjoyed it. I really, really am, because I know how much you enjoy this genre of game, and you're getting another one pretty soon. It's a sequel, actually. So back in 2021, a game, Solasta, was released, and it involved, according to I'm looking at Abe's review from 2021, it used the 5.1 edition rule set for D&D, and it unfortunately got some rather, let me put it this way. 2 games were released that year, and one of them was Baldur's Gate 3. And Baldur's Gate 3 is Larian. Like, obviously, they were Divinity Original Sin and Divinity Original Sin 2. And, like, my God, pretty damn big studio, whereas Solasta was a smaller studio. That being said, general opinion says that they kind of punched above their weight. Abe gave it a 78, and it was well received. It's just not as well received as, say, Baldur's Gate 3. It is getting a sequel now. So Solasta 2, and you got an early access review earlier this month. Actually, is it earlier this month when this episode comes out? Yes, it is. It's coming out on the 27th, so it's still earlier this month. Thank God. I can't believe April's over. So let's talk about this for just a few minutes because it sounds pretty cool. You played the first one?
Yes, that's right. I've played both of them. So, you've hit the nail on the head. It came out with massive competition from the cinematic masterpiece, the big budget Baldur's Gate 3, and Solasta was kind of the kind of relatively pretty, but younger kind of sibling, if you like, punching above its weight, quite janky in places, but with a big heart, and with a big focus on cooperative multiplayer and the ability to quite quickly, pull together your own kind of dungeons with the tool set provided. Pretty simple tool set, but nevertheless, you could knock stuff up together, and that kind of cooperativeness was really, really fantastic. Lots of verticality, so the combats and the actual strategies required were quite cool. So I think it definitely had a unique place, even with the competition it experienced at that time.
And jank can actually be quite endearing as well.
Mm-hmm. So definitely.
Yeah. So we're moving on now from the original engine. They're moving on to Unreal 5, which is, dramatically going to improve the graphics of the game. And obviously it offers them tools that they didn't have before. So let's just talk about this for a second. So aside from the graphics, you say that this feels more like a dev toolkit. It doesn't quite feel like a full game yet, which, fair enough. It is early access.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because I was reminded about when Baldur's Gate 3, I can remember playing the early access when that was released, and it was the Nautiloid encounter, which has since, the scrapped large chunks of that when the full game got released. And it's interesting how, what they've positioned as the early access, it pretty much is the first act. So I think it's what we'll get in the full release. I don't think they'll do a Larian and change things significantly. But like you say, it's quite very modular. It feels almost like one of those kind of session one, kind of off the cuff DM kind of, right, throw some guys together. There's a mystery about your family's got a bit of a dark past. You need to investigate what's happening. You're going to be sent to another place, almost by default, teleported to this, other sort of jungle, tropical location and city. And then basically, try and find out what's happening, explore the city, explore the rural environments around there. But it's all very much not quite as cohesive. There's plenty of lore, for example, but it's quite siloed. Lots of factions, but not really as clearly almost embedded. And part of that's because it is the early access and maybe they've not been able to put in some of the extra detail that might be there. But I think thinking about how it was in the original, I think that's probably just the nature of how these guys will go. I think it's not trying to be the big budget cinematic, retelling of a hugely massive thematic story. I think it's going to be more around giving you the pieces to maybe, explore how you're going to tell that story, and particularly with the combat, how you're going to approach that more than anything else.
We're looking at turn-based here. Obviously, we're looking at turn-based if they're using 5e.
Yeah, and it does it really well. One of the biggest strengths, and it was the thing I think that helped the original, is that it does a really good job of taking, and not the most complex rule set, but it presents it really well. The user interface is sleek. They've done a great job at giving the key information all the way around the actual display screen, including the selection of abilities, including nesting of abilities. They have done a brilliant job, I think, of keeping that really, really clear. In some ways, I think probably better than some of the fellow games because of how complex some of these systems are. So it looks really good on that respect. I was never at a point where I thought, right, how can I do this? How can I step over here, or how can I jump here, or how can I do this? It was all pretty intuitive, which I think is a great strength given that it is only early access.
It looks pretty. It looks really good. I at least based on the screenshots.
Yeah, the actual fidelity, really is there, and they've done a lot of work with the actual kind of facial sort of scanning as well, and just the actual body scanning for a lot of the companions and the different creatures that you meet. That's noticeably improved, as is some of the camera work as well. They have tried to be more cinematic. I think the shift to Unreal Engine 5 is definitely something that was, I think, a key thing they wanted to get. Interestingly, and I know you might come on to this, Jenna, it does mean that they are at the moment a little bit in the dark, and we're not hearing much around whether or not there will be much user modability or whether they'll have the same kind of dungeon crafting tools as they had in the original because of the shift in tool sets. And I think that might be something just to watch, because I think that of everything, I think that the game might be held back because it doesn't offer that kind of, janky modability that it had before, or at least the ability to craft some of your own bits and bobs. So it's going to be interesting to see whether the developer does kind of go back and think, yeah, we do need to put that in, or whether that's a bridge too far given the amount of resources they need just to create the game using a new engine.
Well, you say it's brimming with potential, and that's very, very obvious looking at the screenshots.
Yeah, it's when you look at what they've done, like I say, with the different and all the other bolt-on systems as well. Like there's a new system now they've got like a hex travel system as you're moving around the world map or the overland map now, where you can trigger encounters. Some of them are timed. Some of the encounters are narrative encounters with sort of skill checks. Some of them are full combat encounters. I thought that's really well done. That's something that I thought again harkens back to the tabletop background. I could see a lot of potential there. Some systems aren't there yet. So, for example, the faction system's there, but there's no real sense yet of how that plays out in terms of benefits or bonuses, or what exactly that means. Whether that means some quests can be completed differently, not really clear yet. Crafting, which is a huge part of the tool set, isn't there yet, just because they've not activated it. As far as I know, I don't think it's been patched in yet. So there's a lot to add in. I think it's one of those games where I think the early access, and from what I've been reading online, just following it on Steam, I don't think at this moment it's created quite as much momentum as the original. So I think it's going to be interesting to watch to see how its early access period develops and to see how it can keep capturing, because they're trying really hard. As I say, it's pretty. They've got much higher profile voice actors in now. I think Ben Starr's involved, Aurora Wide's involved, Amelia Tyler, some of these guys who, have been involved, if you like, in this recent resurgence across the range of games, they're all involved. So they obviously, are trying to raise the profile of it as a piece of, gaming literature. It's going to be interesting. I think for me, I keep coming back to it. I think it's the modability, it's the ability to, be able to, for a DM to kind of run it as the DM with online, with an online group, but have control and have craft there. And I think that if that's not there, I think it will be a lesser game in some ways, even than the original.
It's really interesting. I'm watching campaign 4 of Critical Role right now with Amanda, and one of the things, I've never really gotten into live play, and I've never played D&D. I've always been my or CRPGs, to be honest. Like my history tends to sit in like JRPGs, that kind of thing. But it's been fascinating watching it, and watching especially the combat, and seeing the parallels between games like this and those, where it's like, oh, isometric, the history of it, where it's like, why did they originally choose an isometric perspective for CRPGs? Oh, it's because models and miniatures. And like basically the whole idea was, what if these models and miniatures what if they just continued beyond what we can build and create a world with? And it's been very interesting seeing the parallels between CRPGs and obviously tabletop games. That might be an interesting conversation for a future episode, actually. I want to remember that.
Make a note.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think that Solista 2, obviously it's an early access. I really hope they get some good support from fans during that period, because obviously support really is what makes these products and makes these companies, it gives them the resources that allows them to grow and to provide more content. Speaking of that, if you're looking for a way to support us at RPG Fan, you can check out our store at www.rpgfan.com/shop. Lots of things on there. You hear me talk about them every week, including t-shirts, mugs, all kinds of stuff. I think we have some new stuff coming up later this year. I will keep you informed about that. Another way to support us is to check out all of our podcasts. You are currently listening to Random Encounter, and in last week's episode, Mike was here to talk about PAX East 2026. We talked about a ton of awesome looking indie games that I'm absolutely sure that we're going to be talking about later this year and well into 2027. We also have Retro Encounter, and they just wrapped up their two-parter on Persona 5. So if you're a fan of the Persona series, or you were thinking about diving into Persona 5, you can go into your backlog. It might have been sitting there for a while, and you can start playing, and then you can listen to some Retro Encounter and hear them talk about it. We also have Rhythm Encounter on the site. Our last episode of the year was Music of the Year 2025, but I know you can expect more Rhythm Encounter coming up soon. A few episodes are recorded. We just need to get them edited and everything. If you'd like to get in contact with us here, you can fire us off a message at podcast@rpgfan.com. I would love to hear from you. If you have any ideas for future episodes or discussion questions or anything else like that, fire me off a line. I'd love to talk about it. If you'd like to send me an email, you can do so at jlogan@rpgfan.com. And you can also find me at Blue Sky at johnologan.bluesky.social. I'm not the only person on here with an online presence. Zach, where can we find you?
You can find me on RPG Fan, where I write all my reviews, previews, features, news.
Terrific. And Mark?
Yeah, so similarly, I'm also on Blue Sky, and you'll also find me just active on RPG Fan, where hopefully I'll try and get at least one review every month. It's my New Year's resolution this year to make sure I get something up there for all the guys.
Music to my ears. Okay. If you enjoyed this podcast, please share it with your friends. Help us get the word out there. And you can also rate us on iTunes or your other podcast player of choice. Zach, Mark, I really like to thank you both for coming out today. It's the weekend, and these are not small games. Mark got a better experience than you, Zach. He got to play Pillars of Eternity. You got to play Starfield. But these are still not, both of them are pretty damn expansive games, and they take a lot of time. So thank you very much for taking the time to play them and to share your thoughts on them.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. And thank you everyone out there. And remember, whatever you're playing, have fun.